Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So I want to make this video as simple as possible, right? I get a lot of questions about zeroing AK iron sights and stuff like that, and there certainly are several different videos that do it very well. For instance, Robski at the AKOU has a really good video on zeroing AK irons the Russian way, right? Using their methods and the specifics that pertain to the Russian style zero. And that format to me is superior as far as the AK irons are concerned, because a couple of things that we have to acknowledge are this. If we zero an AK, a set of AK irons the same way that we zero a set of AR irons, you're going to run into a couple of problems. The first problem is that this rear sight is fairly far from your face, even though the length between these two is actually just a touch longer than a set of standard M4 sights. And if you don't believe me, line them up yourself. Now, the reason that is sort of an issue is because, well, they're not designed to be used in the same way that an AR peep sight is. They're actually designed to be used very similar to a set of Mosin Nagant sights, or a lot of bolt action rifles that came out from the era just barely previous to the AK type rifle, right? Now, with the zeroing method that the Russians use, they essentially have you use a 6 o'clock hold. And that is, you line the sights up like a set of regular pistol sights, but instead of holding dead center of a target and trying to cut it in half, you actually use a 6 o'clock hold, and the point of impact is the center of what you intend to shoot. Now, these irons and this rifle were specifically designed to shoot a person rather than a really small object, right? They were used as sights that you could use pretty fast, snap up on somebody's waist, and hit them in the chest with several times. So that was the methodology behind those sights. Now, what we're talking about here is slightly different. What we're talking about here is making something work with a set of limitations. Because, for instance, on the AK irons, the way that is proper, quote-unquote, to use them is where you set your slider to 300, you back off to 110 yards or 100 meters, and then there's a specific set of measurements on a specific size box that you're going to want to paint black so that it matches up, and you use a 6 o'clock hold with the front sight post in order to make those work. But let's say that we don't have those. Let's say that we're at a pay-to-play range where you can't get 110 yards, where you are only allowed to post targets at a certain distance, and a lot of ranges max that out at 100, or they don't allow you to post at 110, or they only have 50 yards. It depends really on where you're at. So this is more of a way to get a fairly close 200 yard line, not meter, zero, with the AK type rifle, making things work with what you have, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to start at the 50 yard line, and we're going to line our sights up just like we normally would with a set of pistol sights, equal height, equal light, to where essentially if I was to look straight across this rear sight here, I'd be drawing a straight line between it and the front sight post. That's equal height, and then equal light, meaning that front sight post is centered. Focusing on that front sight post and doing our best to try and keep ourselves from canting the gun, just keep the gun upright relative to the world. And sometimes that doesn't even mean necessarily to your target. Sometimes we post stuff crooked. But doing our best to not have a natural cant in there, and that turns itself into a slight problem with me personally, because I have a tendency to cant the gun slightly this way. So while we're zeroing, we're going to keep the gun upright as much as we can, right? And I'm not saying to stick a level on your gun or anything like that, but relatively speaking, keeping it straight up and down with the world. And then what we're going to do is at 50 yards, we're going to cut this guy off at the neck. And when we do that, we'll go into where the intended point of impact is, and we'll essentially go from there. Immediately after that, we're going to go ahead and go to the 200 yard line, right? Now, guys, understand that that had I had more time, I would have had a short 5-shot group here and there and get dialed in perfect. But it's one of those things where I was rather limited on time today. So what I did instead is I went out to the 200 yard line I fired 20 rounds, and you'll actually see as the AK starts to heat up, so does the shot group, like every other rifle ever. And at 200, you'll see that it starts to open up a little bit, and you'll also see that a 50-yard line zero, just like with an AR, isn't perfect to 200 yards. There will be a little bit of a variable here and there depending on what it is, but it helps you get dialed in real tight, and you can use it as a reference to go forward. So either from there you'll have the capability to go ahead and use a metric zero or not, depending on the capabilities of the ranges you go to. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check this out. There are a couple of core things that we're going to go over here. The first thing is how exactly to line up your iron sights, where to place them on a target, and where you want those rounds to impact based on that. Now, we'll go over exactly how you line up the iron sights themselves here in a minute, but what I want you to do is I want you to focus on this head target, right? You guys will see that it's previously shot. We came out here and we shot a whole bunch of random crap in the SAM 7 review. I shot a bunch of 45, that kind of thing, and I was just like, screw it, I'm going to tape this up and reuse this target. So we have ourselves a target that I just shot right now, right? I switched over ammo from some Wolf to some Red Army Standard, and here's the thing. What we are really wanting to do here is we want to line those iron sights up like a regular set of pistol sights, okay? Equal height, equal light. The AK irons were specifically designed to use a 6 o'clock hold, right? And the reason for that is simply to where on their system, they're simply trying to hold for the belt area and hit a dude in the torso, right? These rifles were designed for shooting people, not shooting really tiny little circles and stuff like that from great distances. However, you can use those sights to do that, and I'll show you how here in a minute. Cutting the target off at the throat at 50 yards, right? And what we're trying to do is that we're trying to steer our shot group into the A box zone of the head on like a regular USPSA cardboard target. Now with this box here, it's drawn out a little large, but essentially that's about yay as far as the measurement is concerned, okay, from high to low, and it'll cut off about here on either side. So what we're looking at here is I'm off a little bit to the left, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you guys exactly how these work, how to use your tools for them. And something else to keep in mind is there are certain things that we need to make sure that we do, right? Now, if we're using a 6 o'clock hold, okay, obviously our point of impact is going to be a little high. When we're zeroing the rifle specifically, okay, obviously if we're standing up or if we're kneeling or doing some other stuff where we're moving around, we're not always going to be perfect. But while we are zeroing, what we really want to do is we want to do our very best to not cant the rifle while we're zeroing. We want the gun essentially straight up and down relative to the world, right? Now, I'm not saying to go out and take a level to your rifle and stuff. What I'm saying is that a lot of times people have a natural cant in how they roll guns in their shoulders. I know that I roll mine slightly to the right because it's just kind of fitting into that shoulder a little bit and canting a little bit. What we want to do here is while we're zeroing the rifle, we want to keep ourselves from canting the gun. We want to get it more or less in an eyeballing sense, straight up and down as far as the world is concerned. And sometimes, not in this particular sense, but in some cases, that means that your target will be a little canted a little bit here or there. It's not a big deal. What we're trying to do is hit a specific spot on the target, not worried about so much where the target's oriented. So we want a rifle more or less straight up and down. And what we're trying to do is that we're trying to hold that front sight post right here, equal height and equal light with the rear sight. And we're going to hold our front sight post here and impact into the A zone of what would be like a USPSA A zone in the head. Okay, so we're going to go to the rifle here and we're going to talk about where I'm going to push these sights relative to, you know, where I want the point of impact to be. All right, so we got our rifle down here at the 50-yard line, right? Now, there is a con to zeroing this rifle like this. And it's a rather noticeable con simply because we're not using the metric system, right? So for the most part, we're not going to be able to use our slider as much as we want to. If we want to use a metric system, go out to 110 yards and use the measurements that the Russian manuals actually provide, then for sure we're going to want to follow that specific doctrine. However, with this one, it's more of a, I don't have that capability, so how do we make this work anyhow, right? Now, the way that we have our sights set up now is we have a set of iron sights. I got myself a little tool here. As you guys saw, I was off a little bit to the left, and I want to go right. Now, here's the thing. I may have said off to the right on camera, but whatever. I was off to the left. I want to come right. Now, here's the thing. Simply think of your front sight post as a set of screws. Okay. Now, if we're trying to adjust our elevation, right, what we have to do is that we're essentially moving the front sight post in the opposite direction of where we want our point of impact to be. So if I was impacting low, right, I would have to bring the front sight post up. Well, which direction is up? Think about this again as a screw, right? If I'm going up, I'm having to unscrew it. You know, left loose, right tight, right? So if we're bringing our point of impact down, we have to bring the front sight post up by unscrewing it. It's as simple as that. Now, if I'm trying to go or bring the point of impact to the right and I'm off to the left, again, we're going to move in the opposite direction of where it is that we want our point of impact to go. And a really good method of remembering this as far as your left or right is concerned, for some reason it always translates left to right and not for elevation. But for left to right, think of it as your front sight post is chasing the previous point of impact, right? So if we're off to the left and I want to go right, I'm going to take my front sight post and chase that group by pushing it to the left, thereby shifting my point of impact to the right. So that's what I'm going to do here. Now, I'm not off by very much, and you'll notice that the adjustments here a lot of times are essentially by feel, okay? So it's one of those things where here's a couple of things to be pretty cognizant of. Now, the front sight post is a little less sensitive to like a half turn or a quarter turn or something like that because, again, it's threaded in like a screw. But the front sight post is way more sensitive. So generally speaking, I do this by feel, but generally speaking, anytime that I turn my front sight post, right, any number of turns that I do, like for instance, if to bring my point of impact where I want, it was a half turn. If I'm trying to go that same distance with this front sight post to the left or right, I will cut that correction in half, right? Now, this is a very, very slight adjustment. So all we're going to do is that we're going to tighten it down until we feel as if it's nice and tight. Pay very close attention to our front sight post because it will start to move. And we're going to make a very slight adjustment by pushing the front sight post to the left. And that should be it. Now, the kind of cool thing about the Sam 7 is that it's a very smooth set of irons to adjust. A lot of your arsenals are very, very tight, and they require quite a bit more force, to the point where I've seen guys with like Tapco front sight tools sitting there bearing down with both hands trying to move the thing, and that's essentially because that drum is a press fit object, right? So generally speaking, a lot of arsenal front sight drums are for the front sight tower, and relatively speaking, rather oversized, and they're pretty tight to start. And their front sight posts tend to be fairly difficult too, just because a lot of the times, especially with their new guns, the finish that sets in on the front sight towers is also really locks those things into place. So I would pay very close attention to that. But here we go. I'm going to go ahead and fire a 5-shot group here, and we're going to go ahead and see how that essentially changes things. go ahead and set ourselves up. All right, so let's go check it out. All right, so as you guys can see, well, whether or not you can see, the shot group in here is actually corrected just about perfect to where I want it to be, right? Now, there was a little bit of shooter error in there. There was one as far as just an elevation change and all of that. And I'm not sure if you guys can notice, but it's like 20-ish degrees out here. And while I'm layered up properly as compared to the last video, I'm still pretty cold. And I'm going to use that as an excuse for my shitty shooting. But we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And as far as that A zone is concerned, while I was off to the left a little bit, our shot group is now pretty much dead center of that A zone in the first place, right? So I'm 110% happy with where that is. Now, here's the thing. The reason why we're holding here and just here and not having a greater hold is that you'll see that what this essentially turns itself into is it's very close to like a line of sight 200 yard line 0, because I'm not using the slider to move the iron sight at all, right? I'm just keeping it there. So when we actually back up to 100 yards, again, we're using American distances with an Eastern block hold, right? So when we back ourselves up to 100 yards, you'll see that the point of impact will actually increase a little bit. And what we're going to do here as well is that instead of holding at the neck, what I'm trying to hold for now is essentially right here. Okay, now, why is it there? It's a little bit above the waist, right? Because if I hold at the waist area, which is about here, the impact is going to be fairly low compared to what it is that I want, right? So what I'm trying to do is that I'm holding just a little bit higher than the waist. Like, for instance, instead of just holding in that waist area, we're holding up just a little bit higher, like just under the solar plex area, so that we can hit him in the heart area, right? And essentially, again, this is after a little bit of experimentation on my part. So what we're going to do is that we're going to try and cut our front sight post off right about here, keep that nice and even, so that we can impact into the heart area. So we're going to go ahead and back up, shoot at 100, and you'll actually start to see that once you back up to a football field, little tiny variations, like if there's any issue on your part, you'll see it over here really fast. So let's go ahead and back up and see what happens there. All right, so we're back at 100 now. All we're gonna do is just line up, do some shooting, make sure that our windage is good, as our elevation is, as far as that brain box is concerned. All right. right. Now, let's go down there and see. Okay. Well, we had a nice flat white target to shoot at, so no real reference point to work with there, but you know, it is what it is. It's kind of crazy, man. Like, I notice a lot that there are a lot of people coming out with like aftermarket parts and stuff that really don't understand how to use the AK irons, either in the metric sense or in the sense that we're talking about. And they come up with all these solutions for stuff that they really don't understand. Like, for instance, replacing this rear sight, right, with a peep sight rather than trying to move a rear sight back here. There are some out there that do that, but it doesn't make any sense because it works about as good as a ghost ring on a shotgun, right? And there are some places that that come out with like these huge U-notch rear sights, and it's designed to have the whole thing used as like a what you call it, point of aim, point of impact, which that doesn't really work out too well because the front sight post on an AK is just really, really wide, you know. So, okay, here it is, right? Now, as far as just the shooting is concerned, you guys can see that it wasn't the most patient shooting of all time. You guys also notice that on this white target, it's kind of hard to have like a reference, but that's not that big of a deal. The little bit of variation in the front sight post as far as elevation and the rear sight and stuff, that still works out just fine. Okay, now let's take the neck out of here as a possible target because it's a thin thing, right? Still, rounds are in the heart for the most part. Okay, you can factor in a lot of human shooting error and stuff like that, but the problem that's associated with AK irons all the time is that they're trying. Westerners try to use them with Western thought process. So trying to go point of aim, point of impact, not only would that have taken so much longer to do, realistically speaking, you would not have had shot groups like that, or even if there was a little bit of elevation disparity on the rear sight, no way. Okay, mostly because there's too much iron sight obscurity. Obviously we saw what happened here, you know, and it's really not that big of a deal. You know, you can see obviously that there was not much disparity there as far as where the target was shot and all that. I mean, if I were to sit there and really breathe it out and really take up my time to fire all the rounds necessary for it, you could see that it's not, you know, it would have been much tighter. You know, especially if there's some kind of reference or something, because all I had was a flat white target to work with, because you can't see these lines at 100, I promise you. So it's pretty easy to work out really well. You know, now granted, with optics and stuff, obviously this tightens up quite a bit because you can float a red dot on there much easier. You can see Tim from Military Arms Channel, you know, using a piece of glass to shoot ultra tight groups. But as far as practical accuracy is concerned, especially with a set of sights that a lot of people figure are way too inaccurate to try and use at 100 or whatever, that doesn't make any sense to me. You know, so just so you know, as far as where I'm holding and stuff is concerned, I was basically floating in this space, right, between here, and you can actually see where the elevation changes are. So let's say that we're trying to shoot at this guy and we just hold at the belt. We're still hitting in this area, more or less. It's a gut shot, and that's what this rifle was designed for. It was designed to be a fighting rifle, not a target rifle. Okay, meant to shoot a person. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to rip this target off. We're going to back off to 200. And I'm going to set up the camera there so that you can see that target 200 yards away. And then we're going to take you down there and see what there is to see. All right, so all the way down there, we have our same paper target That is at 205 yards. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do a little bit of shooting out to that distance. And from there, we will go ahead and see what the hell is going on. And just so that you guys know, on the other side of that is a hill that rolls over the top. There's a little horizon there. And nothing but miles and miles and miles of farm. So, don't you guys worry. Alright, so let's go ahead and set up and do a little bit of shooting all the way out there. Alright, let's go see how we did. There's a little bit of a windage adjustment that we have to do because we're off to the left-hand side just a tad. Now let's get in there and get on the other side of this brush. You can even see how some of those rounds hit some of this brush. Alright, so let's give it a look here. Okay, starting from the top down, we got 1, 2, 3. Going off to the left-hand side, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, cool. So we got our hits. It's not bad, but you can actually see it pretty well, you know. So what's kind of cool about this is that we'll go ahead and I'll tell you where exactly my hold was, and we'll go ahead and talk about it. All right, so as you guys have been able to tell here, we had a little bit of a wind to deal with, but that's not everything, because you can see that there's a little bit of a leftward bias on it, which is fine because all you really have to do is adjust your zero slightly, right? So just making sure that I'm still recording. So, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, really, but I actually miscounted. There were 19 impacts on this. I counted this guy as 2, but I must have hit a hard branch or something and it started to keyhole a little bit because that was a single impact. You know, not a big deal. But as you guys can see, just holding here and impacting here, and then for me, I'm holding at about here on the target, we essentially have a 200-yard line zero, and it works out really well. Now, at 100 yards, if you're doing the same hold, you're going to impact about here, so hold a little bit lower. But it's a way for you to essentially take regular yard line measurements and zero your AK rifle until you either have the capability to do a metric system zero or not, depending on what it is that you want to do. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below about this little method on zeroing an AK with using essentially what you have versus what you want. And remember, if you want to get trained as far as your AK is concerned and want to come out to us, that's fantastic. Freaking, we help guys with AKs all the time, especially on a lot of little things. If you guys want to come out and learn how to use anything else, that's great too, because we have classes listed and that changes all the time, so keep yourself updated on the website. If you want to support us through Patreon, and if you want to train for an even cheaper price, you can sign up for $35 a month and you train with us as much as you want, as long as you're signed up to that. Or you could just, essentially donate whatever it is that you want. It really does help with all kinds of stuff, especially for a lot of things that we want to do going forward, bringing in soldiers and training them for free. All expenses paid, all that through what you guys send to us. So it's greatly appreciated, even if you guys want to send in like a nickel one time. It helps far more than you realize. If you want to join a discussion page on Facebook, I'll leave a link for that in the description below also. Same with the Patreon page and the website. And, as always, if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments section below. So, till next time, guys, remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.